Imagine waking up every morning under the constant shadow of conflict, where the distant rumble of artillery blends with the everyday sounds of life, and hope constantly battles against heartbreak. For the people of Gaza, war has become a relentless companion, a grim rhythm that shapes their lives, their dreams, and even their sense of what is possible. Today, as the world's attention pivots once more to this battered strip of land, the question echoes louder than ever. Is this the moment that will finally break the cycle of violence, or are we simply bracing for another chapter in an endless saga of shattered peace deals and mounting despair? The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not just a headline, it is a century-old story of competing nationalisms, broken promises, and the stubborn persistence of human suffering. Its origins reach all the way back to the late 19th century, when the currents of Zionism and Palestinian nationalism began to shape new identities and territorial claims. Over the decades, landmark events have left deep scars on the landscape and on the psyche of millions. Think of the Balfour Declaration of 1917, in which the British government expressed support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, a moment that ignited both hope and dread among Jews and Arabs alike. Fast forward 3 decades to the year 1947, and the United Nations passes a partition plan aiming to divide the land into separate Jewish and Arab states. This blueprint, however, satisfied few. It set off the first Arab-Israeli War in 1948, a conflict remembered by Israelis as their War of Independence and by Palestinians as the Nakba, or catastrophe, when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced from their homes. In 1967, the Six-Day War dramatically altered the map again, as Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and other territories. These pivotal events have left wounds that never fully healed, and the legacies of displacement, occupation, and contested borders remain at the heart of today's crisis. Every time the world seems to glimpse a path to peace, be it the Oslo Accords of the 1990s, the Camp David Summit, or more recent international initiatives, the effort has faltered on the rocks of deep mistrust and unresolved questions. The fate of Jerusalem, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, the boundaries of a future Palestinian state, and the status of settlements. These are just a few of the issues that have proven stubbornly resistant to compromise. Now, leap forward to the present day. Gaza, a narrow coastal enclave roughly the size of Detroit but packed with more than 2 million residents, has become the epicenter of tragedy and global concern. Since Hamas seized control of Gaza in the year 2007, the territory has endured a brutal blockade, intermittent wars, and a humanitarian crisis that only seems to deepen with each passing year. The latest chapter began on the 7th of October, 2023, when Hamas militants carried out a devastating attack on southern Israel, killing approximately 1,200 Israelis and taking an estimated 250 hostages. Israel's response was swift and overwhelming. A relentless military campaign targeted Hamas infrastructure but also devastated Gaza's already fragile urban fabric. In the months since, Palestinian authorities report that more than 56,500 people have been killed in Gaza, with women and children making up over half of the casualties. The human toll is staggering and defies easy comprehension. Each statistic represents a family shattered, a future lost. Food insecurity has reached catastrophic levels. According to the World Food Program, there has been a 90% increase in acute malnutrition among children under 5 in northern Gaza since May of this year. Scenes of malnourished children and desperate parents haunt the world's media, underscoring the urgency of international action. The main entry point for humanitarian aid, the Rafah crossing on the border with Egypt, is operating at just 30% capacity due to ongoing fighting, bureaucratic hurdles, and security threats. Aid convoys are routinely delayed or turned back, and relief workers face immense dangers as they try to reach those in need. The international community has responded with a mix of outrage, pledges of support, and diplomatic maneuvering. Egypt, a long-standing player in the region, has put forward a new ceasefire proposal, a 60-day pause in hostilities, tied to the release of some Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners. This plan is seen by many as a potential first step toward de-escalation, but it is far from a comprehensive solution. The United States, recognizing the severity of the crisis, has pledged an additional $150 million in humanitarian aid, focusing on food, water, and medical supplies. Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council is engaged in heated debate over a resolution demanding an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. The fate of this resolution hangs in the balance as the United States considers whether to use its veto power. Elsewhere, the Arab League, at the request of the Palestinian Authority, has convened an emergency session to discuss the spiraling violence and the dire humanitarian situation. Regional powers, including Qatar and Turkey, are also working behind the scenes, leveraging their relationships with Hamas and other Palestinian factions. Within Israel, the public mood is shifting in subtle but significant ways. Recent polling indicates that nearly 3/4 of Israelis now believe the government should prioritize the return of hostages over the total defeat of Hamas. This represents a marked shift from earlier in the conflict, when calls for a decisive military victory dominated the national conversation. The hostages, both living and presumed dead, have become a symbol of the nation's vulnerability and the limits of military power. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has acknowledged these competing pressures. In a recent address to his internal security service, the Shin Bet, he stated, "First of all, to rescue the hostages. Of course, we will also have to solve the Gaza issue to defeat Hamas, but I estimate that we will achieve both tasks." Yet the fundamental obstacles remain daunting. Negotiations have repeatedly broken down over the same core dilemma. Hamas insists it will release all hostages only if Israeli troops withdraw fully from Gaza and the war ends, while Israel demands that Hamas surrender, disarm, and go into exile, terms that Hamas categorically rejects. For ordinary Palestinians, promises of peace have become a cruel refrain. As one weary resident put it, "Since the beginning of the war, they have been promising us something like this: release the hostages, and we will stop the war." They did not stop the war. This sentiment, echoed across Gaza, speaks to a profound crisis of trust that no diplomatic formula can easily resolve. Experts warn that the situation is teetering on the edge of catastrophe. Dr. Miriam Marmer at Human Rights Watch has been forthright. The continued blockade of Gaza and restrictions on aid are exacerbating the humanitarian crisis and constitute a form of collective punishment. Khalid El-Jindi of the Middle East Institute argues that no ceasefire will endure unless the underlying political issues, particularly the occupation, the question of borders, and the status of Jerusalem, are addressed. Gilead Sher, a former Israeli negotiator, adds that Israel needs a robust plan for what comes after military operations. Without a clear strategy for governance and reconstruction in Gaza, any military gains will be short-lived. In the midst of devastation, however, some see the faint outlines of opportunity. The war has, paradoxically, created openings for new regional alliances and for a rethinking of old assumptions. The Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states in recent years, may offer a foundation for broader engagement on the Palestinian issue. At the same time, the scale of destruction in Gaza has spurred unprecedented levels of international engagement, with aid groups, governments, and even tech companies mobilizing resources at record speed. So, what are the possible paths forward? Let's break down the scenarios and their implications. A second scenario is the protracted stalemate, in which neither side achieves a decisive victory and the humanitarian crisis deepens. In this case, the world could witness further waves of displacement, rising malnutrition, and the complete collapse of Gaza's healthcare system. The World Food Program has warned that acute malnutrition among young children has surged by 90% in northern Gaza since May. The International Committee of the Red Cross reports unprecedented challenges in reaching civilians with vital medical supplies. As days turn into weeks, the cost in human lives will mount, and the risk of regional spillover into Egypt, Lebanon, or even Jordan will increase. A third, more optimistic scenario involves a broader negotiated settlement, forged under intense international pressure. This would require both sides and their backers to make painful compromises. For Israel, this might mean accepting the presence of a unified Palestinian government in Gaza and the West Bank, and agreeing to a phased withdrawal from occupied territories. For the Palestinians, it could entail recognizing Israel's security concerns and making guarantees against future attacks. International actors, from the United States to the European Union to regional powers like Egypt and Qatar, would need to provide robust guarantees and financial support for reconstruction. Yet, the biggest barrier to such an agreement is the lack of trust and the legacy of failed peace processes. Daniel Kurtzer, a former United States ambassador to Israel, insists that a two-state solution remains the only viable path to lasting peace, but achieving it will require courageous leadership and a willingness to compromise that has been sorely lacking on both sides. You cannot bomb your way to security, and you cannot negotiate from a position of maximalist demands, he observes. For now, the two-state solution remains more a slogan than a plan, but its logic still shapes much of the international discourse. A fourth, darker scenario looms as a real possibility: the collapse of the two-state solution and the emergence of a one-state reality, in which Palestinians and Israelis are locked in perpetual conflict over the same land. This would likely mean decades more of instability, periodic violence, and international isolation for all involved. Hossam Zaki, the Arab League Assistant Secretary General, has lamented that the international community's failure to hold Israel accountable has only emboldened further violations of international law, a dynamic that, if left unchecked, could have far-reaching consequences for the entire Middle East. So, what does all this mean for the wider world, for global economics, technology, and the future of international relations? First, the crisis in Gaza is not an isolated tragedy. Its ripple effects extend far beyond the region, impacting everything from global energy prices to refugee flows. In the early months of the conflict, oil prices spiked as traders feared disruption to key shipping lanes and energy infrastructure. Countries as far afield as Germany and Japan have had to reassess their energy security strategies in light of Middle Eastern instability. Second, the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza is driving a wave of innovation in disaster response. Drones are being used to deliver medical supplies, while blockchain technology helps track aid distribution and reduce corruption. Telemedicine platforms have enabled doctors in Europe and North America to consult on critical cases in Gaza, sometimes performing virtual surgeries in real time to save lives. These advances, born out of necessity, are likely to reshape how humanitarian aid is delivered in future crises, whether in Syria, Sudan, or even in the wake of natural disasters elsewhere. Third, the conflict is a sobering case study in how wars are waged and witnessed in the digital age. Social media platforms have become both a tool for advocacy and a battleground for competing narratives. Graphic images and first-hand accounts from Gaza reach global audiences within moments, shaping public opinion and, in some cases, influencing policy decisions. At the same time, misinformation and propaganda spread rapidly, complicating efforts to build consensus or verify facts. The era of live-streamed warfare has arrived, and with it, new challenges and responsibilities for governments, journalists, and tech companies alike. Fourth, the economic costs of the conflict are staggering, not only for Gaza and Israel but for the entire region. The destruction of infrastructure, the loss of human capital, and the disruption of trade have set back development for years, if not decades. International aid, while vital, is often a stopgap measure. What is needed is a sustained investment in reconstruction, education, and economic opportunity. Without this, the cycle of poverty and violence will continue to claim new victims. Fifth, there are political lessons to be learned. The repeated failures of diplomacy in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict highlight the dangers of neglecting root causes in favor of short-term fixes. As Lynn Hastings of the United Nations has said, the scale of destruction in Gaza is unprecedented. Inaction is not an option. The international community must move beyond expressions of concern and commit to genuine accountability and sustained pressure on those who hold the levers of power. Otherwise, the world risks normalizing a status quo defined by perpetual war and humanitarian disaster. And here's a lesser-known but crucial insight. Major conflicts, while devastating, often catalyze some of the most significant technological and social innovations. The urgent need for remote health monitoring, for example, has led to breakthroughs in wearable medical devices that could one day benefit patients far beyond conflict zones. Similarly, the logistics of delivering aid under fire have spurred advances in autonomous vehicles and artificial intelligence, tools that will be invaluable in future emergencies around the globe. Recent polls showing that nearly 3/4 of Israelis now prioritize the return of hostages over the destruction of Hamas could signal the start of such a shift. Similarly, the growing chorus of Palestinian voices demanding a real end to the blockade and a pathway to dignity reflects a deep yearning for peace. If leaders on both sides and in the international community can harness this momentum, there is a chance, however slim, to rewrite the story. Ultimately, the future will be shaped by the choices made in the coming weeks and months. Will the world's leaders summon the courage to move beyond slogans and make the hard, historic decisions required? Or will inertia and cynicism prevail, consigning another generation to the same cycle of violence and loss? The cost of failure is measured not only in headlines or diplomatic communiques, but in tens of thousands of lives and in the lost prospects for a more just and peaceful Middle East. Every day of delay deepens the wounds, making the eventual work of reconciliation all the more difficult. For those of us watching from afar, there are practical lessons to draw. First, humanitarian needs must never be held hostage to political calculations. The world must keep demanding accountability, transparency, and sustained aid, not as acts of charity, but as investments in a common future. Second, understanding the economic and technological dimensions of conflict is essential for anyone who wishes to make a difference in the 21st century. Wars like the one in Gaza are not just tragedies. They are crucibles of change, shaping everything from innovation pipelines to migration patterns and international law. So, as the world holds its breath, the question remains, will this moment mark a turning point or simply another tragic milestone? If you found this analysis insightful, be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into world events and the tech-powered changes shaping our future. What do you think? Can this ceasefire effort finally hold, or is another cycle of conflict inevitable? Share your thoughts in the comments below and stay tuned for our next exploration. Thank you for watching, and remember,